What is up, creatives? This is Tom. Welcome back to another video. First of all, I feel like I should introduce myself and say thank you to so many of you who have recently joined the channel from my recent iPhone content on the iPhone 12 Pro, comparing it to the Canon EOS R. I'm absolutely buzzed to have you here on the channel. If you don't know, this channel is all about content creation, photography, videography, all that good stuff. And like I said, I'm absolutely buzzed to have you here for this journey. Now, if you don't know, one of my favorite YouTubers, personally someone who I watch all the time, is a guy called Matti Haapoja. I will link his channel down below in the description. And when I was going back over some of Matti's older videos, I actually stumbled across this one where he's going over 10 mistakes that filmmakers make, videographers, content creators make when they are just starting out. Beginner filmmakers, beginner videographers. And these are sort of his thoughts on what those mistakes are and how you can avoid them. So as someone who has recently gone full-time, this year was my first full year of sort of working for myself, being a full-time content creator, I thought that I would share some of my thoughts on the sort of mistakes that I've made, some things which I've definitely done, which hopefully you guys can learn from. I thought I'd up the list ever so slightly. Obviously, we're not going to go over Matti's original points. I'll link his video in the description if you want to watch those. So hopefully these are all new, fresh little tips and mistakes that I've definitely made, and hopefully things which you can learn from. Okay guys, so we're kicking off super simple here, but this is definitely a mistake which a lot of beginners, real beginners, photographers, filmmakers will definitely make, and it's shooting in auto. Auto is a super useful tool on your camera if you're just wanting to sort of bang off a couple of shots nice and quickly, but on the whole it's a very limiting mode, and it's not going to give you the best results in terms of the look and feel that you want your images, your video to represent. You want to shoot in manual, understand the basics of camera settings, be that ISO, shutter speed, aperture, control those three things, and you'll be able to help your images look much more cinematic. Now this is an absolutely massive one, and there's definitely times you're not going to be able to always control when you're able to shoot projects. Sometimes you're asked by a client, you need to shoot it at midday. You're just going to have to shoot it at midday if you've only got one day to get the project done. However, if you are given a preference, always shoot within either the beginning portion of the day, so the first couple of hours of the day after sunrise, or the end portion of the day, the last couple of hours before sunset. What this is going to do is it's going to flatten out your lighting, give your videos a much more soft look instead of a harsh lighting source directly above you. You don't want people's faces to be lit by a very harsh sun from the midday peak. You really do want the sun to be lower in the sky, and it will just basically give you a much nicer, softer feel. All right, I included this one in the list because I have literally been here, literally done this. When I was going full-time, starting to think about going full-time, the first thing I bought for myself was a gimbal. I bought the Zion Crane 2. And don't get me wrong, I think that piece of equipment was actually a fantastic investment overall. However, I was fully convinced in my brain that I needed that gimbal before I was able to go full-time. And whilst it's true that maybe there's some projects that you do absolutely need a gimbal on, or at least some form of camera stabilization, on the whole, I'm here to say that you do not need a gimbal as the sort of most important first thing that you need when you want to start creating videos or films. Gimbals are amazing tools, but they are definitely overused. They are kind of sometimes quite unreliable. You need to charge them up, and they also give a look that is very sort of mechanical. They're fantastic for things like real estate videos, but they don't have a lot of character to them. Personally, I have found in the last sort of year or so, a much better alternative to using a gimbal is actually rigging up a heavy camera rig that doesn't sort of have lots of micro jitter in it. You're going to get images of much better character and just better feel for your video. Okay, so this one, a super common one, and that is either sort of using one lens all the time on your camera, or using the wrong lens for the wrong scenario. And basically what I mean by that is lenses have a different characteristic. So if you're shooting an interview, chances are you're going to be slightly further away and maybe have a wide shot and then a closer up shot. So you're not going to be wanting to use a 16mm lens for that, because the distortion on the face is just going to be super odd. For an interview, you're probably going to want to be around that 35mm to 50mm range, and then have an option of a zoom zoom lens off to the right, perhaps. That's going to give you a much better images and make your images feel natural. If you're shooting landscapes or scenery or B-roll, chances are you're going to want a zoom lens for that. Understand the uses and characteristics of your lenses, and you can make sure to choose the right lens for the right piece of work. Again, this is another one which I've definitely done, and then shooting everything at the lowest f-stop. Don't get me wrong, this is not the worst mistake that I've made as a filmmaker, content creator, but it is definitely something I have done from time to time, and that's just wanting to shoot everything at f1.8, f2.8, the lowest setting on my lens. And now sometimes this is good, again, if you want a nice shallow depth of field, but don't feel restricted to shoot always at f2.8. Your lens is actually not going to be sharpest at f2.8. You can step that up to f5, f6, f8, and your lens will be the sharpest point. So depending on what you're shooting, crank that f-stop. That is not necessarily a bad thing. Oh, another one that I've definitely done. This is 60 frames a second for everything. Now, sometimes you do think that shooting 60 frames a second is the right thing to do. Maybe you're shooting loads of B-roll and you want the option to slow some stuff down. Now, this is wrong for a couple of reasons. First of all, is that when you shoot 60 frames a second, your motion, if you ever want to sort of play that clip at normal speed, that motion is going to be weird, and you're basically just not going to be able to recover sort of natural 24 frames a second style motion. If you're wanting to slow your clips down from 60 frames a second to 24, this is absolutely the right thing. If you're wanting to sort of slow human movements, this is the right thing to do. However, just shooting all of your B-roll at 60 frames a second because you need the option to potentially slow it down is not the right thing to do. Choose which sections you're going to slow-mo, shoot those at 60, and shoot other things in 24. All right, this is a big one because people sort of shout these rules here on the internet, and rules, in my opinion, are made to be broken. And what I mean by that is that there are certain sort of sacred cows that people don't like to sort of cross or break. And a big one here would be doubling your shutter speed to your frame rate. So if I'm shooting, for instance, this video here, I'm shooting at 25 frames a second because I'm in Europe, and I'm shooting that at 1/50 shutter speed. Now, that isn't necessarily the right thing to do because I'm in a controlled lighting environment. However, there's not much movement going on in this clip here, so if I wanted to change that shutter speed, it wouldn't change the look and feel of this video all that much. People often feel that that rule, for instance, is just set in stone. You can't change your shutter speed, but depending on what you shoot, you definitely can. You might get a slightly different look. Maybe that look is actually something that you're trying to achieve. If you're wanting maybe much more motion blur in your footage, maybe you want to crank that shutter speed down. There is nothing wrong with that. As long as you know what you're doing, rules are made to be broken. All right, so speaking of rules that are made to be broken, I don't shoot log all that often. Now, this is a funny one because there will be filmmakers, cinematographers who want to shoot everything in log all the time. And again, if you know what you're doing, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. However, personally, if you're in a run and gun situation, maybe you can't always totally control all the lighting in a scene, I will actually shoot at relatively neutral picture profiles that are available on these cameras, the Canons, the Sonys, and that will sometimes give you a greater flexibility of not ruining your images. Now, log is a fantastic format, and you can create some beautiful cinematic images using a log format. However, sometimes you might just need to look at what you're shooting right there on the back of the camera and get that sort of baked into the file. Again, a lot of this comes back to just knowing what you're doing and choosing the right thing for the right situation. Okay, I know we briefly touched on it, but now I'm going to talk specifically about some camera gear. And the first would be using cheap filters. Now, I have definitely done this. I'm sure the vast majority of you watching this have done this. You spend a lot of money on your lenses, your camera lenses, and you then realize you need a variable ND filter so you can control your motion blur on your camera. And what do? You just sort of go on Amazon and type in variable ND, and you just buy the cheapest one at the top. You are spending a lot of money on your lens, and you need to think about what you're putting in front of it, because if you use a low quality filter, you are basically degrading the entire quality of that lens. Spend a bit more money on your filters, anything you are putting in front of your glass, and you will not regret it. This is going to seem like a slightly weird one coming after what we just talked about and think about gear, but this is about thinking too much about your camera gear. Sometimes you have to just go out and shoot. Think about what you've got with you, what you've got on you, what you've got available to you. Just go out and shoot and make the most of what you're doing. Don't sort of let thinking about maybe not having the perfect gear for the type of situation. You have to remember that the output of a shoot is much more important than what you're actually taking it with. From one extreme to the other, now we're talking about investing in the wrong gear, not sort of prioritizing the right gear. And I know we discussed this briefly when we were talking about gimbals. That is a bad prioritization of purchases. If you have a limited amount of money you want to invest in camera gear, camera equipment, make sure that you are investing in the right things first. I would recommend a good tripod as an absolutely fantastic investment. That should be one of your sort of first things as a filmmaker, beginner filmmaker, or photographer. Invest in some decent lighting and invest in some decent lenses. All of those things are really good investments in you as a creative. And then finally in this gear section, we come to gear lust. And this is something which I have all the time because of what I do here on YouTube, but it is just thinking that my gear is not good enough and I want to change it all the time. And whereas actual fact, I should be thinking slightly more about the content that I'm making and the type of content, what I'm actually shooting. And I should forget about the gear because I've got good gear and it doesn't need to necessarily change all the time. You should definitely think about improving your gear from time to time, but it's not something which should hold back your content creation all the time. Sound design is absolutely essential for good video production. A good example of this one is the recent Camden advert that I did for that I actually shot on the iPhone 12 Pro. If I take that video and I play that for you without any sound design.
You've got a can of Camden Hell's Lager. Nice choice. So quick, pour it, listen to it. That's the sound. You've got a can of Camden Hell's Lager. Nice choice. So quick, pour it, listen to it. That's the sound.
You can see that that advert is not nearly as good than if I had actually put some sound design in there, which of course in the final project I did, and it made a big difference to the overall feel of the video. Think about your sound effects, think about your music and how those things sort of interact to create the overall feel of your video. Do not forget your sound design. This sort of comes slightly back to the gear conversation we were having before, but you never want to be in a situation on your shoot that you haven't prepared properly for. And I'm sort of talking about this from a gear perspective, things like SD cards, not formatting your SD cards, having space available to you, or batteries. With videography and filmmaking particularly, there is a lot to think about in terms of charging, batteries, power. Make sure you have properly prepped before your shoot, because especially if you have a client there, that is really not going to be a good situation if you have a camera that is flat or lighting that won't turn on. And then finally, in Matty's video, he talked about story. What I'm actually going to talk about is just thinking about what you're shooting. A lot of the work that I shoot doesn't necessarily have a story or a narrative to it, but as a creative, I should be thinking a lot about the actual thing that I'm shooting versus the gear or the camera or how that's sort of working to actually capture that image. What am I shooting? How can I make it look better? If it's got subjects in, how can their performance sort of help improve the video? Filmmaking and videography is a multifaceted thing. There is a lot that goes into creating good content, and cameras and gears are only one small aspect of that. There we go, guys. I think that video is going to be quite a lot longer than most of the videos on my channel, but I have a lot of these sorts of thoughts and tips. Like I said, as someone who is, starting to build my full-time videography career, like I said, I've sort of made a lot of these mistakes and things which hopefully I've learned from, and I wanted to share some of those thoughts and opinions with you. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this video, found it interesting. If you have any thoughts, definitely drop them in the comment section. As always, I'll be down there responding to everyone who has any thoughts or questions. If you've made it to this point in the video, I would thoroughly appreciate it if you hit a like. If you're not subscribed to the channel already, definitely go ahead and do that, and I'll catch you guys next time.